Hello, welcome to another CleaveTech tech tip. Now, it's been a few weeks since I got back from the World Championships in Latvia, and I've been trying to catch up with some work and orders, etc. So I've been rather busy, but you might have seen my post on Facebook and YouTube about some of my results, and to be honest, I'm really pleased and very happy with what went on at the World Championships, and you can see those on the screen. But before the World Championships, I went through some preparation and showed you some videos of what I was doing to prepare my cars and get myself ready for the World Championships. So now that I'm back, it's time to show you what went on. And we're going to start with this first class 24th production team race. So, to refresh your memories, or to tell you if you didn't know in the first place, the 24th production team race at ISRA at the Slotcar World Championships is a two-person team for an hour-long race. You do 7.5 minutes on each one of the 8 lanes on the track, and you share the driving 4 lanes each. You do a 1-minute qualifying where all the laps count. So the first driver goes on and does 30 seconds. Power turns off, you swap drivers and you swap controllers maybe, and then the second driver carries on from where the first driver left off, and it's all laps to count, and that seeds you into the races. Now I think there were pretty nearly 70 odd teams, maybe 60 something teams, a very high 60s number of teams, so that's a lot of drivers competing in the team race and a lot of competition. Now we actually qualified extremely well, and we qualified second place. So that got us a really good lane start of white lane.
You ready? Quiet, please. Here we go. Next driver. You ready? Here we go.
One of the features of the team race at the Slotcar World Championships is that it's actually a race where you get handout parts to use. And they actually hand out quite a lot of the parts. You draw them out of a bag or out of a big pot, and they're all numbered up, and you have to use those parts. They're all ID'd, identified. So you might have seen that this body shell here has stickers on it, number 35. The interior even has number 35 because you get a handout interior, handout body shells. Even the tyres, you can see, have stickers in them, handout tyres. You also get a handout chassis, and when I take the body off as well, you'll see that the chassis has a sticker on top and is marked as well. Now, you have to build the chassis. The chassis doesn't come pre-flattened. It doesn't come with all the bearings and so on in it. You have to build the chassis, flatten it, straighten it yourself. Obviously, if you want to, you don't have to flatten and straighten it, but it's probably going to go better if you do. The motor is also a handout motor, and again, when I take it apart, you'll be able to see some of the things they've done. You can see this green seal on the motor. Again, because the motors are all pre-built, you're not allowed to take them apart and do anything with them. You can just sort of put them in your car and go. So there's quite a few handout parts and quite a lot of work to do on the car to get it ready to race. So let's take the body off and have a look. So just before I take the body off, let's have a look at some of the damage that's sustained. And you can see there's very little damage on the car. Around the back end, all very good. A couple of little tears at the front here. You can see just there where it's caught something, had an accident at one point. And there is a bit of a tear up the side here. That's probably the most major damage that we've received. It must have caught something, must have hit something. I don't know exactly when that happened. But it's okay, it's between the two pinholes. It's not been too disastrous. And it must have gone, there must have been a small nick in the body here where it was trimmed. And it's finally sort of ripped up there. But when you manage to qualify for a higher race or a top race, you're with some of the best drivers in the world. So they should be really good and not fall off loads. And there shouldn't be a lot of cars that you should be hitting. So you end up with a cleaner race, or at least that's the idea anyway. And we had a pretty clean race. We did very, very well. So let's take this body off and have a look at the chassis. And you can see the motor has the marking on it and the chassis has a marking on it as well. Now, if you've seen my video about preparing the parts for the team race, you can see that I prepared the guide in advance and some of the lead wires in advance. I made sure I had an axle. I made sure I had a gear that fitted nicely. Made sure I had some bearings. I prepared all my pin tubes as well, getting those all ready for the car in advance so that I didn't have to do all of those during the building stage. A lot of this stuff was prepared for 2020. The Worlds in Latvia were supposed to have happened in 2020, but with COVID and everything, it got postponed. So these JK chassis, a lot of the motor parts, things like that, they were all pre-bought and pre-prepared for 2020 because we thought the World was going to happen then. So these JK chassis are actually a slightly older version. I think the newer ones come shot blasted or sandblasted or something like that with a different sort of finish on them to try and remove some of the rougher edges. But these chassis come with some of the burrs around the edges. Now, you might have seen my video on preparing a C43 chassis, where I'll put a link up there if you haven't seen it. There's a whole series of videos on getting a chassis ready, and I pretty much followed that series of videos as that's how I build a chassis. But there were one more little tech tip I can give you about straightening the chassis that made it slightly easier, and that was at the front here, these parts here on the pans, in order to get this front J-bar to sit better and for these bits not to hang down below the chassis, I was able to get a pair of pliers over the top of it. So if you remove the pans, you can get a pair of pliers over the top of these and you can actually squeeze these together a little bit, which helped give a little bit more clearance for the J-bar and stopped it from jamming in these holes. So with a little bit of scraping with a knife to get rid of some burrs, a little bit of squeezing with the pliers, I managed to get the J-bar through and get it to sit nicely. I also found that the chassis had a little bend just across here that I was able to straighten out. It was there and there on both sides, and I was able to straighten that out with a pair of pliers. So taking a closer look, you can see I've got a Samson HP weighted guide with a Samson Harry's nuts, I think he calls them, guide nut on there. Really nice, really good quality. The guide is nice and solid on there, doesn't wobble around too much. You can see that these pin tubes here, these are Mid-America pin tubes, and in my video on my preparation you could see I'd turned the pin tubes down so that I had some actual more wobble on the pin tube in the holes, because you're not allowed to open the holes up at all because that's grinding the chassis. And then I've got some gel tape, sort of some silicone-y type gel tape over the pin tube to sort of damp the wobbling of the pin tube. I tried this with and without. To be honest, I didn't notice a massive amount of difference, but just thought by damping it, it's got to maybe be slightly better with a little bit of damping so that it doesn't wobble around too much, but still allows the body shell to move, but damps that movement so it's not sort of shaking about everywhere. And you can notice it's thinner gel tape, so it doesn't damp it too much. It's not the same thickness as the gel tape that I'm using here, and here. That damps the chassis a fair bit more and stops the chassis from wobbling around, but still gives it some movement. like that. So I've done that on all of the 4 pin tubes. You've seen I've used this Atan gear here, and I don't know whether you can see it's got a 3 on it like that, which means it's a 43 tooth angle gear, 72 pitch with a 7 tooth Cahosa pinion. Really good quality, really lovely gear mesh. I really like these angled gears from Atan. They are very, very nice indeed. Now let's focus on the motor. Now if I'm right, this is a Cahosa can with Cahosa magnets. I think they're T2 full height Cahosa Group 12 magnets, or C-can magnets, with a Cahosa M-bell. Not too sure what the brushes are. I think they're Coford Bigfoot brushes from an older batch a while ago. Now the armature. Now this was quite a talking point at the Worlds. They're an S&K armature, which are a bunch of guys from the Ukraine who are working really, really hard to make really high quality products. Now, this is a Group 12 armature. You can see it's marked on it 48 degrees. Now, I'm going to talk about timing of armatures and so on in a future video about motors and motor building in general. But 48 degrees is about the positioning of the commutator and the commutator slots in relationship to the stack and the windings and the magnets. And the timing obviously depends on when each pole of the armature is magnetized to help your motor rotate. Generally, the higher the timing, the higher the motor will rev. It will probably have slightly less torque but more top end. That's the general theory. And 48 degrees is pretty high timing. When you go above sort of 50 degrees, the motors tend not to run. So at 48 degrees, it was pushing it quite a lot to the limit of actually, are these motors going to run or not? And again, the higher the timing, perhaps the hotter the motor can run. Now, as you can see, these motors are sealed motors. They've got some seal over each one of the can screws. I don't know whether you can see underneath as well, whether you can just see it there, but the brush springs themselves are also sealed to the, there we go, that's a better view. You can see the brush spring itself has also got some seal onto the brush spring hook, so you can't remove the brush spring, so you can't get the brushes out. You've got to run the motor as you get it. It's double bull raced, and there didn't seem to be any problems with the bull races, but there were some problems with the motors, and a few people ended up with their motors going up in smoke, which generally was because there was a short, perhaps on the armature, or some of them had overheated. Now, when they measured them afterwards, it appeared that the timing of the motor was more than 48 degrees. Some were even sort of 52 degrees on some of the poles, and it's not surprising they got rather hot. Now, I know the S&K guys, and they would have worked really, really hard and tried really hard to make high quality products. After all, it's their name that's gone on these armatures, and they don't want to end up with a bad reputation. But I do believe that perhaps they didn't want to make 48, but that was specified by the organisers. But anyway, maybe 46, maybe 42 degrees, something like that. Somewhere between 42 and 46 degrees perhaps would have been a safer motor to go for a handout motor. After all, everyone's running the same, so it doesn't really matter. Now, I'm sure they're going to do some investigation into why the armatures did overheat, perhaps why they developed some shorts, etc. And I'm sure the S&K guys will be working really hard to improve their product for the future. I've had a couple of S&K armatures myself and used them. They've turned out really nice, pretty stable. One of them, again, did develop a short, and they were really, really good about it, and they were able to work with me and replace the armature. And I say brilliant customer service from the guys, so thank you very, very much. So I'm sure they'll be working really, really hard to improve their product for the future to make really good high quality armatures. So anyway, there were some issues with the motors, and again, it was one of the really top teams had an issue with their motor. I'd say probably maybe more than one of the potential top teams had an issue with their motor, which sort of threw them out of the running. There were quite a few motors that again failed to start on restarts, and the motor needed the car needed a bit of a push to get the motor working. And again, that's probably due to a timing issue. And as the brushes wear down, as the commutators wear down, the timing does change slightly of the armature, and again, that can cause the motor not to start. So there was a fair bit of issue with the armatures. I don't know if there was any issue with magnets falling out or any problems with like that this time round, or bad brushes, etc. But that's always a possibility when you're using some stock parts. And that's where we're going to leave it for today. Join me next time, where I'll be talking about some interesting things from technical inspection or scrutineering, however you want to call it, and how I managed to get through and solve that problem. And I'm going to leave you today with some video taken by Stefano Mirabelli from Model Drome in Italy. He did some good videoing of the event, some slow-mo, and I hope you enjoy these closing clips. Bye for now. See you next time.